Collaboration and competition between China and the U.S. drive technological advancements and innovation, benefiting industries such as AI, renewable energy, and healthcare. My next guest has been following this relationship for years. I speak to American economist and professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much. I met Sachs at his home in New York City. Let's talk about massive scale. You look at China's population, you look at the supply chain, the domestic market, people talk about the scale. Can you talk about the scaling law in China?
China is excelling and is the low-cost producer of most of the major technologies that the world's going to need in the coming 20 years. In digital, in green technologies, in electric vehicles, in battery supply chains. It's just a very sophisticated supply side, and it's becoming more sophisticated all the time.
You talked about digital, and you talked about kind of this transformation we're seeing when it comes to energy. Can you talk about the opportunities for China there and perhaps some challenges?
I think for any major economy, whether it's China, the United States, European Union, or others, the future is to move to green and digital. We have an environmental crisis, and we have remarkable new digital technologies. So we're going to have to move to zero carbon energy systems, to electric vehicles, to hydrogen economy. And we're going to be using digital technologies for every step of the way. So building that base, that integrated green and digital industrial system is absolutely critical. And China's in the lead of doing that. The United States has been going around in circles for years debating, do we care, don't we care, are we making an energy transition, are we not? Well, we're stuck in our domestic politics, and in the meantime, China's moving ahead.
Sachs is the director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. He is president of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network. He's editor of the book, Ethics in Action for Sustainable Development. Can we talk about supply chains, though? Because we saw the tensions between the United States and China, and people started talking about perhaps I'm going to shift my supply chains. Can you talk about what we've seen there, and is that a challenge to China moving forward?
The United States government, I should say, not the business community, but the government is trying to break the supply chains with China. It's told American companies, go to other suppliers, move away from China, go to Vietnam, go to Malaysia, go to Mexico, go to other places for production. What we're seeing is an expensive diversion of trade. As a result, the U.S. is importing more from, say, Vietnam, but Vietnam is exporting to the U.S. by importing more from China. So instead of us buying Chinese goods directly, we're buying Chinese goods, in quotation marks, indirectly via Vietnam. So we're upsetting the efficiency of the international system because the American policymakers somehow think that they can outsmart the markets. The fact of the matter is China's doing extremely well in the actual production, the actual costing, the actual technologies. So we can say break the chains. It's not going to happen that way. And then when you look at not what's happening between China and the U.S., either directly or indirectly in our supply chains for our own consumption, but look what's happening in other economies of the world, the emerging economies. Well, China's very competitive in those markets. Who's going to be selling electric vehicles in those markets, the U.S. or China? I'd bet on China on this. Well, this is frustrating to American strategists who think, America should run the show. And if they want America to run the show, it's not going to be by putting on these trade barriers and protectionism. It's going to be by improving the American economy.
And this decoupling, de-risking that you hear so much of it, what do you make of it?
Well, I think it is basically economic illiteracy by American policymakers in general. You see, there's a part of the American government which says we should rule, we should dominate, we're the hegemon, no one should challenge us. It's an official doctrine of the United States that the U.S. should be the primary power, the dominant power in every region of the world. That's the mindset. Not we should be efficient, we should be productive, we should be happy, we should be prosperous, but we should be number one. And that's an obsession, I would say. And it's not a very well thought out idea. Of course, it's leading to tensions in all parts of the world, but it also doesn't work. These are mostly, excuse my saying so, but economically ignorant people who come from other fields, military strategy or other things, and they don't understand how economies function.
China consistently runs a trade surplus with the United States, exporting more goods to the U.S. than it imports. This surplus is a key element of China's trade strategy.
You mentioned once that China is facing two challenges. One is imbalances of income. The other is the environmental protection piece of it. Why do you think that is, and where is China in addressing these issues?
Well, every major economy is facing those problems, high inequality, rising inequality, in fact, because of changing technologies which favor some parts of society against others. People with lower educational access or attainment are suffering, whether it's in the United States or in other parts of the world. And every part of the world's facing an environmental crisis. That's a global phenomenon. We have absolutely deranged the world environment because 200 years of industrialization has done profound damage everywhere. So getting this right, more fair societies and more environmentally sustainable societies is a universal need. It's a universal objective, actually. Every government of the United Nations adopted sustainable development goals for exactly the purpose of addressing these two big challenges, inequality and rising inequality, I should say, and environmental catastrophe. I think China's doing a good job on thinking through what to do because China has a planning process. It looks to the future. It sets milestones and dates. It looks to what China's going to be in the year 2049. It thinks through what kind of transformation should be made. It invests systematically in the technologies that will be needed for that transformation. I admire all of that. I wish, frankly, the United States would think ahead a little bit more rather than just fighting short-term politics. I wish other countries would think ahead because when you need to make a change, you really should think, where are we going? How are we going to get there? What's our strategy? What technologies? How are we going to bring people along? So you need that kind of forward-looking approach. In the U.S. now, everyone's playing short-term games.
Short-term games and kind of short-term goals. I mean, when you look at this planning process you just described, and you look at the United States, I remember, both of us are old enough to remember the Great Society. We're going to do something about poverty. Lyndon Baines Johnson. And you look at New York, you walk around here, you see poverty staring you in the face. And yet China did go about affecting change when it comes to poverty. It's lifted a lot of people out of poverty, and it's happened in our lifetime. Can you talk about witnessing this and also the fact that that's not an easy goal? I mean, you can take the easy goals and kind of pick them off. That's a tough one.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned the Great Society because that was a goal that Lyndon Johnson introduced. And then it was about 3 years later that it was said, well, that failed. It was unbelievable. Really kind of, you can't even use the word, but kind of a grotesque stupidity. 3 years into this, China spent 40 years in fighting poverty. Deng Xiaoping reoriented China's economic strategy starting back in 1978. 1980, really, China got underway in its new market orientation, its opening to the world economy. 40 years later, they declared the victory over poverty in 2020. I happened to watch that close up my whole career because I first went to China now 43 years ago in 1981. I then went back all the time each year, sometimes several visits. So I watched China change with my own eyes from 1981 to 2020. I saw the end of poverty with my own eyes. When I first went in 1981, China was a very, very poor country. At times, the government asked me to help, give some suggestions. Around the year 2000, they asked me to tour the western China provinces to have a look what could be done to accelerate the economic development and the reduction of poverty in those places. It was a real privilege. I went to a lot of places I otherwise probably wouldn't have seen. But I saw the change with my own eyes, and it was a long-term effort, sustained, thoughtful, and successful.
And the impact ripples beyond China, doesn't it?
Well, China provides a kind of role model for other parts of the world. I spend a lot of time in Africa, and I speak to African leaders all the time. And I tell them 40 years in China, 1980 to 2020, that can be Africa's future, should be Africa's future. Africa looks to the date 2063 because that's the 100th anniversary of African unity. So they look at a 40-year period from now to 2063. And I believe that that 40-year period, if pursued in a strategy like China's, is going to give Africa the same kind of success. So the example is there. And then the literal connectivity. I was recently in Ethiopia, and I saw a lot of economic development and agricultural improvement. Why? Well, the power lines came from a Chinese-built hydroelectric facility, and the rail that was taking out this agricultural production to the port in Djibouti and then across the Red Sea to the Middle East, which was the market, both were Chinese-built, Chinese investments under the Belt and Road concept. So this is why there's also a literal connectivity in how China's success spurs other countries.
China views the Belt and Road Initiative as a strategic plan to boost economic development and trade by enhancing infrastructure connectivity across Asia, Europe, and Africa. The initiative aims to create new markets for Chinese goods and services, fostering economic growth both domestically and internationally.
It's interesting you talk about the Belt and Road, and yet most people in New York and Washington, it's a debt trap. They have such a negative view of it, and yet it is impacting people who live on the African continent. I spoke to a colleague in Nairobi who said, it's one thing to come and bring aid. It's another thing to build a high-speed rail where you can actually get stuff. If you're out in the hinterlands, you can get it on the train and you can get it to the market. It makes a huge difference.
No kidding. In Ethiopia, you see the villages along the rail develop now. You talk to the farmers. Well, now we can ship our goods out. They're growing avocados. You can't let avocados sit around for weeks or months waiting for transport. Now there's fast rail to Djibouti. From Djibouti to the markets, it's on a hotel breakfast table within a couple of days. So you really move things. That's the idea of the Belt and Road connectivity. When it comes to the bad-mouthing, that's a game. The U.S. is jealous. Oh my God, look, China's doing something good. It's got partners. There are 150 countries, so they have to badmouth it. We actually know now, there were reports just in recent weeks how Trump gave secret orders to badmouth the Belt and Road Initiative. So this is a bit of propaganda of the United States. I see the Belt and Road with my own eyes. It's a highly constructive program. I just wish the United States would do something similar.
Let's talk about China's economy. What does China need to do to keep its economic vitality and keep moving forward, do you think?
Well, there's first a basic principle. When you're poor, you have the potential for very rapid growth because maybe you don't have electricity, maybe you don't have rail, maybe you don't have fiber. So there's a lot of headroom for fast growth. The more developed the economy, you still have potential for growth, but not like 30 or 40 years ago. So China grew consistently at about 10% growth per year for decades, actually. That means a doubling of the economy every 7 years, in fact. And so that was the torrid, super fast period. But now China's become essentially a high-income country. They still call themselves middle income, but it's at the lower end of the high-income range now. And you can't achieve 10% growth. Now they're at about a 5% growth rate. That's compared to about 2% in the United States. So they're still growing quite rapidly. There's been a lot of discussion, I don't know, I think, again, a bit of propaganda, if I may say, China's at the end of its growth phase and so forth. When you visit China, when you visit cutting-edge enterprises, that's not what you're seeing. What you're seeing is rapid technological advance, lots of innovation, and I think a generation ahead of markets for things like high-quality, low-cost electric vehicles, for 5G, digital, for many, many of the things that China is already world leader in.
You said high quality, and of course the buzzwords coming out of the two sessions, quality, productive forces. What's your vision of what that looks like, and how is that going to impact things moving forward?
Yeah, this is very interesting. In China, things get formalized in concepts. So this high-quality productive forces basically means that China's focusing on technological advance now. Well, so is the United States, so are other high-income countries. We're in a technology race, I hope a race to the top, not a race to destruction or militarization, but a way to make our societies better. And China is doing very, very well in computation. It will be highly competitive in artificial intelligence. It's world leader in zero carbon power. It's developing fourth generation modular nuclear facilities. It's doing very well across many, many leading technologies. It's got the biggest 5G network in the world and really pioneered 5G. We then went out and attacked the leaders of that, Huawei and others. I can tell you that's a superb company. And even though the United States badmouths Huawei all over the world, other countries are saying we want their products.
China is a major manufacturing hub for many American companies, producing a wide range of goods from electronics to textiles, which are then exported to the U.S.
So let's talk about China and its impact on other countries. We know that, as you said, it's such an economic engine, and just the doubling in terms of its GDP over time. Talk to us about how that has an impact regionally and globally.
China's the lead trade partner for most of the world at this point. I would say much of the world, but if we actually counted country by country with the most up-to-date numbers, I'd guess for most of the world, China's number one as a trade partner. Partly because China needs a lot of intermediate inputs. It imports food, it imports feed grains, it imports minerals, it imports all sorts of things. But at the same time, it's because the other countries want what China has to produce, whether it's power plants or wind turbines or 5G or rail. China is an exceptionally good, highly competitive, low-cost producer of what the emerging economies of the world want. By the way, also what American consumers want, but American consumers so much want what China produces that both Trump and Biden put barriers on, said, no, you can't buy that stuff. You're going to have to pay huge tariffs. So that's, again, the security mentality interfering with the basic economic logic. But the basic point is China's supply side is very competitive. It becomes more competitive and innovative all the time. And China produces what other parts of the world want.
China is investing heavily in technology and innovation to increase the value of its exports and reduce reliance on low-cost manufacturing.
One final question. We're sitting here in your place in New York, which is amazing because you're heading off to Europe shortly. You're always on the go, but you're just back from China. And the thing I love about going to China is when you go, no matter the distance and time, you see the familiar, but you always see the new. And I know that with the lapse in time with COVID, there was a period probably where you weren't in China. Talk to me about what you saw going back that perhaps has changed over time.
Well, I'll tell you, the most notable single thing is green license plates. Now, what does that mean? Electric vehicles. You go out in Beijing and you just see that already Beijing, with its incredible traffic, has already made this massive switch to electric vehicles. And to understand that, I was taken to some showrooms and to some factories where these vehicles are being produced. You know, China has hundreds of electric vehicle producers, hundreds. Of course, it will shake out. There are a few big ones, but it's an incredibly competitive sector right now, and you see the results out on the road. So this was the single biggest change, I would say, in the 3 years, the pre-COVID and today.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Great. Good to be with you.